Let's be precise about what we're doing here. We are not talking about rockets. We are not talking about electric cars or market caps or what happened to Twitter. We are talking about something more specific and in some ways more consequential. We are talking about Elon Musk as a thinker. As someone who makes claims about how the world works, why civilization is in danger, what consciousness is, and what humanity ought to do. Because Musk doesn't just run companies. He theorizes. He predicts. He pronounces. He has, over the past decade, positioned himself as a philosopher-engineer, someone whose mastery of physics grants him insight into questions that go considerably beyond physics. And tens of millions of people receive those pronouncements as though they were derived from the same rigorous process that builds reusable rockets. They are not. And that gap between the rhetorical authority and the actual intellectual content is what I want to examine today. Start with the method. Musk is famous for what he calls first principles thinking. He describes it constantly in every interview as his secret weapon. The idea is that instead of reasoning by analogy, comparing a new problem to something that already exists, you strip the problem down to its physical fundamentals and build upward from there. It sounds rigorous. It is in fact a trick of framing. Here's the problem. First principles is a term from physics and mathematics. In those domains, it has a precise meaning. You derive conclusions from foundational axioms that are themselves established. But Musk applies the method to domains: demography, politics, artificial intelligence, safety, the nature of consciousness, where there are no agreed axioms. Where the very selection of what counts as fundamental is already a value judgment, already a political act. When Musk strips a problem down to first principles, what he is actually doing is selecting the premises that confirm his intuitions and calling the result derivation. It's not physics methodology. It's physics branding. Now watch him apply it. Take the simulation hypothesis. At a 2016 conference, Musk stated, not speculated, that the probability we are living in a real world is 1 in billions. He presents this as though he has done a calculation. He has not. The simulation argument, in its actual philosophical form developed by Nick Bostrom, is a trilemma, 3 possibilities, one of which must be true, and Bostrom himself is careful to say it tells us very little about which horn of the trilemma we actually occupy. Musk took a carefully hedged philosophical thought experiment and converted it into a confident probability estimate. He laundered metaphysics as engineering. And because he said it with the authority of a man who builds rockets, millions of people received it as though it were a finding. This is not an isolated habit. It is a structural feature of how Musk thinks. Consider his position on artificial intelligence. In 2015, he co-founded OpenAI specifically because he was alarmed about unaligned AI. In 2018, he left. In 2023, he founded XAI, his own AI company, while simultaneously suing OpenAI for abandoning its safety mission. And throughout this period, he has continued to publicly describe AI as potentially civilization-ending. Notice what's happening here. The man who calls AI an existential threat is actively building AI. His justification that a pro-human competitor in the space is better than an open AI monopoly ignores the most elementary feedback dynamic in the situation. When you add an aggressive competitor to an already competitive AI development race, you do not make the race safer. You make it faster. The competitive pressure that already subordinates safety to speed now intensifies. Musk is, by his own logic, accelerating the threat he claims to be addressing. He has never, in any forum I can locate, acknowledged this contradiction, not once. Move to demography. Musk has become increasingly insistent that population decline is the great civilizational danger, greater than climate change, greater than war, greater than any other threat he names. He points to Japan. He worries about birth rates in developed nations. He has made this argument with the urgency of a man who has solved an equation. But Japan is a devastating example for his thesis, not a confirmation of it. Japan has experienced demographic decline for decades. It has also maintained high life expectancy, low crime, relatively stable economic performance per capita, and significant social cohesion. If population decline were the civilizational catastrophe Musk describes, Japan would be the canary. Instead, Japan is a country that is managing demographic transition with varying degrees of success, which suggests the relationship between birth rates and civilizational health is considerably more complicated than Musk's linear model allows. He never engages with this complication, because to engage with it would require him to think systemically, to consider feedback loops, distributional effects, immigration dynamics, productivity changes, rather than treating a single variable birth rate as a master cause. And systemic thinking is precisely what Musk's intellectual framework cannot accommodate. What's driving all of this? I think there is a coherent, if unacknowledged, philosophical substrate beneath Musk's positions. It combines three elements. First, a great man theory of history. Progress is made by individuals of exceptional vision who overcome convention, which conveniently maps onto his own self-image. Second, a consciousness-centric theory of value. The light of consciousness is what makes human civilization worth preserving, which sounds profound but is actually doing enormous unearned philosophical work, deciding questions of moral status and obligation by assertion rather than argument. Third, a linear engineering model of causality. Problems have solutions, solutions are derived from fundamentals, complexity is convention that first principles dissolve. This substrate is never made explicit. It doesn't have to be. It operates as the invisible architecture beneath claims that appear to be about rockets, AI, or birth rates, but are actually about power, genius, and the proper ordering of civilization. And here is the critical point. When an intellectual framework is simultaneously this confident and this unexamined, it doesn't become more dangerous because the person holding it has bad intentions. It becomes dangerous because the person holding it cannot see its own limits. Musk is not a cynical operator who knows his arguments are hollow. He appears genuinely to believe that his method works, that his intuitions track reality, that his experience building physical systems grants him authority over social, philosophical, and political questions where physical systems thinking doesn't transfer. That sincere belief is precisely the problem. A fraud who knows he's a fraud can be caught. A thinker who mistakes the boundaries of his competence for the limits of the knowable, that is a different kind of problem entirely.